This is Extemporaneously, presented by Jacobin Brothers. And now, Mark Jacobin. Donald Trump stormed back into the presidential election and defeated Democrat candidate Kamala Harris by a projected 312 electoral votes to 226. Love him or hate him to the point of tears, Donald Trump is an undeniable force of nature. In addition to winning 31 states, he won the popular vote by more than 4 million ballots, and counting. With a combined total of 211 million votes across 3 elections, he has received more votes than any presidential candidate in history, a record that will not be broken in the foreseeable future. He is the first president to be elected to non-sequential terms since Grover Cleveland in 1893. The first president to be impeached twice, and the first convicted felon elected to the Oval Office. Does the highly unlikely, and unforeseen by national pollsters, victory by Donald Trump indicate a sea change in the American political topography? Has Trump flipped forever 4 states that were regarded previously as so-called swing states? And who is the woman who protects Trump from himself? For Kamala Harris, how did $1 billion of campaign spending, combined with an additional $3 billion worth of friendly media coverage, result in the loss of 12 million votes? What does this disaster portend for the Democrat Party? Has America rejected permanently the ultra-progressive Democrat platform in favor of traditional American values? Or is this a welcome respite on the journey toward the globalist authoritarian society advanced by the Democrat Party and its corporate, media, and entertainment apparatchik? And for those folks who have not been following along, how the heck did this happen? I am Mark Jacobin, along with my brother James, and this is Extemporaneously. James, as the only political analyst to predict a Trump victory within 5 electoral votes and the flipping of 5 swing states, how did you see this coming, and what led the people to this electoral revolution?
Well, thank you for having me back on, Mark. We have a very small dedicated audience and listeners, and we've been in touch with them.
Oh, it's a very large audience, James.
It will be soon. It will be soon once I start my third party. Mark, here it is. We've been talking to the same people. And as you know, I've moved from California to Idaho to Nevada and back again, and discussing politics with a wide swath of people and getting them to talk to our program behind the scenes and talk to me privately. I saw this coming from a mile away. And then all I had to do at that point was find some actual empirical data that didn't match it because I wanted it to match, but pre-existed. And then for the first time in all my predictions, I added in our audience. And it matched so much that I had to look at it like 25 times before I was ready to say it. But the bigger answer there is not an answer, it's a statement. Everybody knew. The people in the media knew. And they purposely lied to dedicated Democratic, good people, good voters, to engender a hatred, not just for Donald Trump himself, and not just for people who vote for Trump, but for people like me who don't vote, for people like you who have your own private convictions, for people like our audience. And they want to make those people hated. But here's the problem. It's not just 74 million votes, which really is only about a third of the population. It's the 60 million people who didn't vote again. And I said it in 2020, and I'm saying it again now. Those people who don't vote are in mass agreement that the Democratic Party has to go. They're still not willing to trust Trump or elements of conservatism, and there's apathy and resignment to the two-party system never being able to be broken. But they voted by not voting, and they did not get in the way of what used to be the progressive, we know everything, we accept everybody. What they got sick of was the Democratic Party will accept everybody, except conservatives, Republicans, third-party voters, neutral people, and people with common sense. And they just got blown back to the Stone Age politically.
Next time, James, don't hold back. Tell us how you really feel.
The American people agree with me.
You're right. We're going on 10 years of a particular orthodoxy being broadcast, driven down people's throats. 30 years ago, everyone said, well, the media leans left. These days, the left is unabashedly in the pocket of the Democrat agenda. And for almost 10 years now, they have been using that as a cudgel to demean, diminish, and marginalize everyone who does not fit into their little cone of what they call tolerance. And they're very specific about whom they will and will not tolerate. As we've seen, only about 69 million people fit in that little cone. Everyone else is left to fend for themselves. And I think you had a vast majority of Americans who were tired of being marginalized and being made to feel that they weren't Americans, they were lesser human beings, and that showed this week.
Yes, and to be mocked and have their religion mocked and have their politics mocked and then being mocked personally and being called Nazis and racist and misogynistic and transphobic and this and that and every other thing, to the point where they stopped talking politics. In 2016, I said, well, maybe the polling was wrong because they couldn't get to the rural voters with the new technology. And in 2020, I said, well, we couldn't really get a clear picture because the mail-in voting was anonymous. First time there's COVID, it was a lot of chaos. But now I'm certain that it's not wrong because they can't contact the voters. It's wrong because they don't want to contact voters that will reinforce their pre-existing agenda. And that agenda includes permanent deficits, school systems taken over for parents, permanent entitlement programs for non-citizens that supersede the entitlement programs for wounded military veterans whose suicide rates are at an all-time high. And this is not bluster. This is not bumper sticker. These are facts. These are absolute facts. The Biden administration openly opened the border, knowing the chaos it was caused, knowing that Trump would come hit them for it, and then they felt they could win by calling Trump a racist and his people racists. But what they didn't count on was that the destruction that was caused by that policy ruined their political party. And it might have ruined it permanently.
In 2016, there were discussions of what the future of the Democrat Party might look like because their approach had been severely invalidated. Then 2020 came along and things went back to normal from many people's perspective. There was an establishment Democrat in the White House. Trump had been relegated to a backseat, hopefully prison from many people's perspectives. We had COVID. COVID was an exercise in global authoritarianism that we hadn't seen in the history of the world. That was just the first straw on the camel that found its way to the 2024 election.
Yes, and globally, every incumbent has lost, and now they've lost here in America. The Biden administration misinterpreted their victory in 2020 as not a response to Trump, because they promised us Biden has a lifetime of experience. The adults, quote, are back in charge. He'll be a steady hand. He promised one term. He'll build back better. In my view, and in the view of tens of millions of Americans, the only things that got built back better was the Taliban, inflation, internal strife, and the complete death of the working class. When Hillary Clinton goes to West Virginia in 2016 and says, your coal mining jobs aren't coming back, ha, ha, ha. When Joe Biden deceives the people that voted for him for 4 decades in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and they just assumed that he would take care of the union voters and the steel mills and the textiles and the auto industry. And he came out right away, for reasons history may never understand, and abandoned those people and called them racists. He gave an interview where he said, if you're black and you don't vote for me, you're wrong. Do you know how insulting it would be to any demographic of voters to make such an arrogant assumption? And he got away with it because Trump was so dreadful in those final months of the 2020 campaign. The black voters didn't forget, and they were sick of being pandered to, sick of being treated like children. Latinos were sick of being looked at as our entire job is to be the maids for the women on The View. We're 4 or 5 generations into having Mexicans being the second highest demographic behind what we call white people. They're entrepreneurial, they're upwardly mobile, and here's the other thing. They have family values. They don't believe in abortion, neither the men nor the women, because they're 90% Catholic. But the elitist, venom-spewing left-wing media, entertainment industry, will let everyone be sexually trafficked and trade sex for jobs, will then lecture you on what's good for you from their 10 houses in Malibu and the Hamptons and the Rachel Maddows and the Joe Scarboroughs who have no connection to actual human beings other than the fact that they want to feel right. And if you don't agree with them, you're not just wrong, you're a Nazi.
Additionally, these people never admit to their mistakes because Wednesday morning, after 3 months, 110 days of telling everyone how great and wonderful Kamala Harris was, and maybe she is, that's their opinion, but they also told us that she was going to win. It was her destiny to win. And then she didn't. And that's politics. But then they quote, as everyone likes to say, they doubled down. Well, those same people that they accused of being racist for not supporting Kamala in the first place, well, now they were extra racist because it was their fault that Kamala lost and Donald won.
Well, sure. And I guess the college students in Dane County, Wisconsin, where the Trump campaign spent a lot of time and actually won the college vote in Dane County. So those are Gen Z people. Gen Z, now young adults who were children in high school and middle school when COVID came along, and they saw their proms canceled, and they saw their trips canceled, and they had to wear masks during sporting events, and they were treated like sheep. But then they grew up, and they looked around, and they said, wait, you mean to tell me the same lab in China where the virus emanated nearby from a penguin kissing a turtle is actually the name of the virus itself? Huh, interesting. Then you've got women who have more at stake in the abortion issue than men, obviously, who voted more for Trump than they've ever voted for a Republican candidate. Because people are smart, Mark. The Dobbs decision is not what any of the propagandists want anyone to believe. Not at all. They made that their primary issue with women. And somehow they thought just because Kamala was a woman, that other women, and they make this weird circle of ridiculous logic. Women will vote for another woman because she's a woman. Okay? That's highly insulting to over half the country. And then on top of that, if we just throw abortion out there, they'll vote for even more. But in every single survey I did, the number one issue was inflation. The number two issue was, I don't want a third world war. The Biden/Harris campaigns wouldn't even talk about this. Joe Biden, as we speak right now, is still talking about how great his term was. These people are delusional.
In his defense, he thinks it's still 2014, James.
What the hell is going on in Arizona? My goodness, when I looked at the stats on education success, Arizona's high up on the chart. I'm just wondering, are they counting with a kaleidoscope down there? Like, how long does it take to count votes?
They say it's a dry heat. Maybe the ballots are catching on fire. I don't know. Trump is currently leading by 6 points with 80% reporting. I haven't run the numbers. Maybe it's still mathematically possible for Harris to take the lead in Arizona.
And continuing on for years now, and especially the last year, the Biden campaign, the left-wing media, every single infrastructure in the country that was visible said, this isn't me, this is them. If Trump wins, democracy is over. This election is not about the issues. It's not about the fact that butter costs $7 a pack, even though Joe Scarborough didn't know that and made a joke about it. Because he probably doesn't do his own shopping. But Donald Trump was their key issue. He's evil. He has to go. And the American people responded with the cleanest, fairest, most least controversial election in modern history. That's the American people doing that. And so when you wake up the next day and you see President Biden and sitting Vice President Harris say, congratulations, Donald Trump has won. Well, wait a minute. Shouldn't you be saying that democracy is over? That a democratic vote that produces a result you don't like will be the end of democracy? Shouldn't you say there's never going to be another election? Like, what exactly are you doing? Because If you say and you campaign, your one campaign issue is democracy is dead if you vote for Trump. He's going to steal it. He's going to rape. He's going to pillage. He's going to murder. He's going to do all these things. But then he wins the Democratic vote. And this is why the argument was so stupid to begin with. You mean to tell me that you think in a free and fair election, that the result of the free and fair election will result in the downfall of democracy? Now, I looked this up. Not once in the history of the historical written word in the last 2,000 years has there ever been a democracy turned to a dictatorship after a fair vote. I'll let them figure out that as they're sipping champagne in the Hamptons.
It's obvious that the media has beaten this horse to death again and again. You're right. They should be telling us how much that America's fall is imminent because of the dictator that now sits in the White House. But there were some fascinating political changes. And for the last 30 or 40 years, there's been a phenomenon called the swing states. So you have deep red and deep blue states. These are states that are reliably going to vote for either a Democrat or a Republican candidate 9 times out of 10. California is regarded as a blue state. Montana is a red state, for example. Now we have the swing states, states like Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia. You've heard these names how many thousands of times over the last 16 months. But there are also some states that we used to call swing states that in the last 2 elections have had a margin of victory for the Republican that is consistent with states that we would consider to be deep red. These 4 states in particular, would you consider them to be red states for the foreseeable future?
No, Mark, I consider them to be American states because in these states you're talking about, Texas, Florida, Ohio, there's just not enough registered Republicans and MAGA people to make them red. These are now solidified voters who take a look at the issues and the candidates, and they vote their conscience and they vote their heart. In 2020, they repudiated Donald Trump. And in 2024, he got them all back and a whole bunch more. It is statistically impossible for those to be, quote, red states.
So the Democrats did such a bad job running the country for 4 years that the tens of millions of people who threw Trump out and said, bring Biden in, are now saying, you know what? Why don't we give that crazy guy another chance?
Yes, and I know this for a fact. One of our Jacobin pollsters told me he's a person in their 50s, and he voted for the first time in 2020, and he voted for Joe Biden to remove Donald Trump. And he's one of our pollsters. And he revealed to me that he voted for Trump this time. That literally backs up all the empirical data that is now tumbling out. It backs up everything that was clear to me going into it. The loading of Trump in 2020 was earned, fair, and accurate. That election was stolen. He got beat. And now they got to take a look at Joseph Biden and the wokeism, fanatical religion that these people possess, and said, no way. But I guess that guy is a genocidal racist. I guess he doesn't think. I guess he doesn't see.
He could also be a sexist or a Nazi. Those are the other options.
I know. And where's my list? Where's my punch card? At least 48 out of the 50 states, Vice President Harris did worse in 2024 than Joe Biden did in 2020. Did worse in 48 out of 50 states. That is nearly impossible. It means that it's not just a bunch of crusty white old men trying to hang on to the last scraps of a patriarchal society that just...
Hey, you shouldn't talk about Joe Biden like that.
In every single state, even though Donald Trump didn't win these states, he improved by about 10 points in California. He got the most votes for a Republican candidate in New York since 1988. He got the most votes from the youth since 1988. He got the most votes from women since 1988. He broke all the records for Latino votes. So maybe instead of the elite ruling media class trying to break everyone down into these little boxes, can we just start calling them Americans and voters and people who have their own logic and live their own lives and don't want to be lectured to by a very small, specific, fanatical group of crazy people? Could we start doing it like that?
Geez, I don't know, James. That sounds pretty radical.
And here's the good news for the American people. I've been saying this quietly, but I'm going to say it much louder. Donald Trump did 2 things in the last 9 years. He destroyed the Democratic Party, and he remade the Republican Party into the moderate party. Moderate in the middle party. killed religious conservatism. He killed corporate cronyism. And he took a very important voting class away from the Democrats: blue-collar workers, union workers, punch card workers, the people that build the roads, the people that build the houses, the people that check out your groceries at the store, the people that work at the gas stations. Those used to be Democratic voters because Democrats used to be, quote, for the little guy, for Main Street. And now they're just for their own street, whatever street they live on in the Pacific Palisades or in Manhattan. And Donald Trump also did what Barack Obama did in 2008, is he ran a 50-state campaign. He went to the Bronx in New York twice and spoke directly in the face of great opposition to him as a person and to his political ideals. And he delivered the same message in the Bronx in New York City that he did in Dothan, Alabama. And he won an extra 22% of the vote in the Bronx because he now has realized he has to be president of all the people in all 50 states and not just his small group of MAGA fist pumpers. The Harris campaign decided that they'd already won and that the whole world agreed with them, and that since they said Trump was a meathead, everyone would vote against their own best interests and their pocketbook and their own eyes. And this political alignment is now the biggest shift in the tone of American politics since 1980. And Trump will go down in history, regardless of the results of the next 4 years, as the major, most significant political player of this century. And I cannot believe I'm saying that. I cannot believe I have to say he earned it. There's been no one more critical of Mr. Trump than myself, but he's here. And I'm going to say the same thing I said in 2016, and the American public said it. Clean sweep, Mr. Trump. What can you do? Okay, you screwed it all up. Okay, Mr. Biden, clean sweep. Start over. What can you do? Well, you destroyed the country almost. So, Mr. Trump, the American people have now given you a second chance, given you something that only one candidate in American history has ever gotten, Grover Cleveland. I'm going to personally make sure everyone knows Grover Cleveland's name in my third party. And I'm going to get Bobby Kennedy Jr. on board. I'm going to buy him off.
And on that note, let's switch over to talking about the disaster in the Democrat Party. Historically, money equals votes. The more money you have to run your campaign, the more successful you are. That's the first mold that Donald Trump broke in the 2016 election when Jeb Bush outspent him 10-1 in the New Hampshire primary, and then Jeb placed like 11th. And that formula has been broken since then. Kamala Harris, after she ascended to the nomination for the Democrat Party 3 months ago, raised about $1 billion. $1 billion isn't unheard of for a presidential campaign, but it is unheard of in 3 months. She inherited the war chest from Joe Biden. She got her George Clooney friends on board to write her lots of checks, a lot of grassroots fundraising. $1 billion in 3 months. It's been reported that the Democrat Party is now $20 million in debt. So we can safely assume that they blew $1 billion and $20 million on this campaign. What they got for their money was a loss of 12 million votes. In addition to some incredibly poor judgment here, I would recommend that the FEC look into the expenditures of the Harris, what's-his-name campaign and look for evidence of malfeasance. Because you can't just spend $1 billion in 3 months and have nothing to show for it. Unless you're Montgomery Brewster.
Montgomery Brewster. Well, it costs a lot of money, Beyonce, to show up your events. Mark, she's busy. And champagne and expensive wine and private jets and beach houses cost a lot of money. Cost a lot of dough. I don't know where that money went. I'm not a mathematician, but that seems like for every $100,000 they spent, they lost a vote.
Something along that line, yes.
As the kids say, it's a chunk of cheddar.
It's an unconscionable amount of money. You have to really work hard to spend $1 billion in 3 months. On top of which, she got the $3 billion worth of friendly media coverage. So that's $4 billion of value, of branding, of messaging that they put out supposedly into the country and bought negative 12 million votes.
I got the answer already. Inflation. Inflation, political hit ads and spending tens of millions of dollars on social media to personally level, destroy, defame, and mischaracterize American voters, eligible American voters, that's not cheap, is it?
No, it wouldn't be. Where do we go with the Democrat Party from here? We thought it was broken after 2016. It's got to be entirely unrecoverable now.
Well, here's what the Democratic Party should have done in 2016, is they should have moved to the middle and blew the Republicans off the electoral map. But they didn't. They moved further left than any party has ever in America. And they did it on the false assumption that the country went with them. What they need to do now is rebuild the entire party from the ground up. They need to stop lecturing, stop pontificating, stop standing on this phony moral high ground, and get back to their roots of being for the middle class. Because when you say you're for the middle class, your actions have to back that up. That's what they have to do. They have to rebuild. They have to stop with the nonsense. They have to get rid of the woke agenda, because if not, they will continue to lose. And if they think this is bad, wait till J.D. Vance gets a hold of them in 4 years.
That sounds like a horror movie waiting to happen.
I haven't voted in a national election since 2012. I vote in local elections. But I was considering voting this year for a candidate that ultimately didn't become the nominee, and that was Nikki Haley. And I've never in my life been a registered Republican. I'm certainly not a conservative, and I'm certainly not a Christian right member. Nikki Haley is a female. She's a member of a minority population, but she's a good politician, and she's moderate. She's a little too neoconish for me, but I would have voted for her. But yet I wake up on Wednesday morning and find out that I hate women and went to vote for a minority and went to vote for a female, when that's not true.
We've spoken rather favorably of the Donald Trump victory. We've spoken favorably of the folks who want to reject the Democrat agenda. But what the victory doesn't erase is that Donald Trump does have a personality problem. He has a management problem. He has a leadership problem. People that are paying attention, if they think back to 2017 through 2021, the White House was a veritable shitstorm. What Trump has to do now is prove to the people who gave him a second chance that he can learn from his mistakes. Doesn't this sound familiar?
Yes, I think we did a fantasy show about presidents learning from their mistakes. Yes.
So we have now brought a president from the past, installed him into the White House once again. Now we get to see if he can, in fact, learn from his mistakes, if he is going to act like an American president as opposed to a homicidal maniac who happens to live in the White House. What's different this time than last time is that he has made his campaign manager, or his co-campaign manager, whatever her title is at that moment in time, his chief of staff, which he did not do in 2016, which is good because that guy's in jail now.
And so are all his lawyers.
This woman whose name escapes me, what's her name? Susan Wiles will now be Trump's chief of staff in the White House. This is now November 9th. We'll see how many days she lasts. First, she has to get to the White House on January 20th, and then we'll see how long she lasts after that. As long as Trump continues to listen to this woman, I think he stands a chance of having a respectable presidency in the eyes of a fair observer. If he doesn't, my fear is that we're going to spin right back to 2020, and we have this lunatic tweeting stuff in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. about things that have nothing to do with foreign policy, with domestic policy, with fiscal responsibility, and everything to do with a self-indulgent douchebag.
Well, that's Mr. President douchebag to you, sir. I agree. And there's a possibility of that, because although the campaign was not that disciplined, it was by far the most disciplined campaign Mr. Trump had run to date. And he listens to Susan Wiles. Mrs. Wiles is a political heavyweight, and she's a historic figure now. I would say the most important non-elected position in this country is the chief of staff of the president, because they have two major functions. Number one, they liaison and work with the Congress on legislation. Because contrary to what the Democrats want you to believe, the president can't just make the laws. The Congress makes the laws. Mrs. Wiles will now deal with the legislative. Reince Priebus, his initial chief of staff in 2016, was a Republican insider from the Republican establishment who sandbagged Trump's agenda because he didn't agree with it.
I thought it was because nobody could pronounce his name.
I certainly can't. And then he blew through 4 chiefs of staff. And then he blew through Sean Spicer and Scaramucci, and it was just complete disorganization. The second function of the chief of staff is the chief of staff controls the access to the president, sets the schedule, sets the agenda, and runs the West Wing. Just like in the TV show, The West Wing. And so if his historic chief of staff, the first female chief of staff in history, of which he'll get no credit for, everything he does that's historic never gets credited because he's terrible, and I mean terrible, at messaging from the White House. Susan Wiles is going to be, outside of elected representatives in the Congress and the White House, the most pivotal and most important figure for America, because if she can deliver a disciplined Trump Part 2 administration and work effectively with the Congress, not like Steve Bannon did when he sat down with the Congress in 2016, slammed his fist on the table and said, this is how it's going to be. I think he's also in jail, by the way.
Well, that's who I was referring to.
Because the other guy went to jail too, Paul
Manafort, yeah. I think Steve Bannon just got out, but it's funnier to say he's in jail.
And how they all end up in jail and Trump didn't, it could be a mystery. But
maybe Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton have the same secret lawyers.
I have a suggestion for now President-elect Trump. It's the same suggestion I offered the Biden campaign, but they didn't listen. I thought if Joe Biden would have went out in June and July, before the assassination attempt, before the debate performance, and said, we do not jail our political opponents. I hereby pardon former President Trump of any transgressions he may have taken while in office, and I want to go beat him in the field of ideas and in the American public. I pardon him so the American public can have a choice between myself and former President Trump, and I guarantee you he would have won. I guarantee it. Because that would have unified the country behind him. It's reasonable. It makes sense. It's fair. It's presidential. It's leadership. But he wouldn't do it. He called him a Nazi. And now I would say to the new Trump administration, we do not jail our political opponents. I would suggest that the Trump administration pardon Hunter Biden. Because every prosecutor I've talked to and seen talk on TV said they never would have brought this case if his name was Hunter Smith. He would never be arrested for anything except drug charges and minor tax charges if he wasn't Joe Biden's kid. Pardon him. Send a signal that we're putting a stop to, before it gets out of control, to arresting people related to presidents, to unlawful prosecutions, to aggressive prosecution. You come out and unite the people and say, look, I mean, business this time. We're going forward. We're not looking back.
Just because we don't put our political opponents in jail doesn't mean that we have to hire them. For example, the Attorney General should be someone friendly to your position and not the holdover from the guy you just beat. Just a mental note there.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe you don't let your Attorney General appoint a commission to investigate you for phony Russia collusion charges in 2016. So yeah, Trump has a lot of political soul searching to do, because as much as he was nearly destroyed by his political opponents in the media, he destroyed himself. He was an equal partner in the conspiracy to bring him down. Now, he has made the greatest political comeback in American history. Although I don't think anything can ever slow down the megalomania traits he shows in public. But if Susan Wiles can keep him under control, and he works with the Congress, and he works with his political opponents, a lot of great things can happen for the American people, because this is what it's all about, Mark. It's not about this party or that party or transcendent first time only politicians like, Vice President Harris or whomever. It's about the American people. If the message didn't come across this time, I don't know what'll make it come across from Mr. Trump.
Okay, James, now that you have newfound success as one of the most accurate political analysts in the country, what's next?
Well, what's next is I one day wouldn't mind making some money doing this. But get some of that Sean Hannity, Rachel Maddow money, hang out with them in the Hamptons. I've been talking about this for years, is we need a viable third party. And none of them ever seem to work. They don't last, and they're usually headed by crazy people No offense to Bobby Kennedy Jr. A third party needs to come along. It's long past time, and it needs to come along. I mean, it needs to be inhabited by all the people who don't vote, all the moderate Republicans, all the moderate Democrats, all the people who are sick, the politics of personal destruction and the venom and the hatred, and get back to the brass taxes of governing on every level. So we start a third party, get Elon Musk on board. We break the two-party system into ashes and sprinkle it in the Potomac River. That's what I wanted.
I think the EPA would have something to say about that.
But not if Bobby Kennedy was on my side, because he's a pretty good guy in the environment. And I would create a department for Bobby Kennedy. It'd be called the Department of Environment and Crazy People. And I'd be like, hey, look, you got to be easy on the whales and the bears. And I think you're crazy, but you're a good environmental lawyer, so you can join.
It'll be interesting to see if there's a place for Bobby Kennedy Jr. in the Trump White House. I will tell you this, James, that the viability of any third party rests upon the abandonment of the winner-take-all system. And what I mean by that is every state awards all of its electors to the candidate who won the majority of votes. So in California, the 40% of people who voted for Trump, doesn't matter. In Florida, the 40% of people who voted for Harris, doesn't matter. But if we apportioned our electoral delegates according to the popular vote, this would do two things. Number one, it would stop the false nonsense about how wrong and undemocratic the Electoral College is. The Electoral College is a very balanced way of amplifying the votes of small states. However, it was unbalanced when all of the states went to the winner-take-all system. So, if we apportion our electors according to popular vote in California, if California has 10 electoral votes in this election, 6 of them would have gone to Kamala Harris, 4 of them would have gone to Donald Trump. This means that people from California don't have to move to Nevada for their vote to count. More importantly, it means that someone like, but not Bobby Kennedy Jr., could run for president. And if he even got 5% of the popular vote, well, that's one electoral vote, or however many he gets as is proportioned. If he does that in several states, now he's racking up 10, 20 votes at a time. Now you have a legitimate third-party candidate, A, and B, you have public visibility to the fact that, hey, this third-party thing is viable. I'm not just throwing away my vote by voting for Jill Stein, which many people have that opinion.
I agree with you that that would be a more effective way, but you have to have a viable third party first and fourth party first, and here's why. Because if you did it like that today, the Republicans would win all the time, everywhere. We'd have a one-party system, and it would not be good. So we need at least a two-party system. And what you're saying would work in the future if we could get someone like Bobby Kennedy Jr. to have a third party that isn't a one-issue party and that doesn't go away. And that comes down to funding. You need tens of millions of dollars to even begin to compete against the Coke and Pepsi of politics, the Dems and the Repubs, the Republicrats, the Democrats. They own everything. And they'll never do what you're saying because it doesn't benefit them. So the third party has to come first, and then you can reappropriate everything because you don't have anyone that'll do that in the Congress at any level. It's a great idea, and it's more fair, and it would make people not feel like they were disenfranchised with the vote, but it's impossible without a third party.
I disagree because this is a state-by-state phenomenon. I think it would break the stranglehold of both parties because candidates don't have to just campaign in the swing states, and historically that's all they've ever done. Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, maybe a couple of other minor states, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico. As a Democrat candidate, you would actually have to campaign in California instead of just check that off the box. Okay, Democrat, California, check. There are fewer registered Republicans than Democrats. That may actually, off the cuff, give Democrats the advantage, but it also amplifies the power of any minority party in that state and dilutes the voting power of the dominant party.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I hadn't thought it through to that extent. But indeed, if Bobby Kennedy Jr. is the head of this new party, Teddy Roosevelt had the Moose Party, you could have the Whale and Bear Party.
Whale and bear party and brainworm party.
Could you imagine a world where Bobby Kennedy Jr. was president? I would have to say I'd rather have Biden or Trump. I mean, Bobby's way more likely, but he is just off the chain with his ideas.
For a long time, I couldn't even get on board with anything he said because his website supported one of the notions that viruses don't exist. Now, I'm as much of an oppositional thinker as anybody out there, and I will always question anything the establishment tells me. But I will also question what the oppositional thinkers say when it sounds like nonsense.
That's very virtuous of you.
And prior to his political ambitions, this is one of the things that he advanced, is that viruses don't exist, which is fine. Okay, viruses don't exist. What is out there making people sick then? Explain that to me.
But here's what we've determined here today, Mark. Donald Trump is the 47th president. The Democrats have some inter-party soul searching to do. And Bobby Kennedy Jr., it's nice to meet you. See you in 2028.
We've been talking extemporaneously. This has been Extemporaneously, presented by Jacobin Brothers. For more episodes and content, visit jacobinbrothers.com.